Welcome to the 46th Triennial Council Panel on Inclusive Excellence, Key to the Future. I'm Lynn Pasquerella, President of the Phi Beta Kappa Society, and we're so thrilled to have you with us today for this critical conversation. At the 2018 Triennial, delegates made diversity, equity, and inclusion a clear priority, resolving that as we approach our 250th anniversary, the Phi Beta Kappa Society will encourage the diversification of membership and seek to provide access to historically underrepresented and first-generation college students. To further this work and inspire the Phi Beta Kappa community, this session will present innovative efforts to embrace a framework of inclusive excellence that emphasizes broad access to the liberal arts and sciences. I'm so pleased to be joined by three extraordinary panelists: Andrea Abrams, Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity at Centre College; and Curzan, Dean, College of Literature, Science, and Arts at the University of Michigan; and Frances Su, Benedictson Carwa Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College. Given that we have limited time with our presenters this afternoon, we're not able to take audience questions in this session. However, we do encourage you to engage with each other, share resources, and exchange ideas in the chat function. As you know, this topic of inclusive excellence is a key theme, and there'll be opportunities to talk much more about this in our sessions that are coming up throughout the week. Andrea, let's begin with you. Controversy over critical race theory, the 1619 project, and curricula involving what some have termed racially divisive concepts are at the forefront of public discussion. We know that 27 states have introduced legislation to curtail the teaching of these topics. And you recently participated in a debate on PBS regarding these issues. Tell us more about the differing perspectives and understandings at the center of the debate and how they relate to the work that you do at Centre.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with such great people and such an important topic. So when I was on this debate on PBS, on the local PBS channel, it was thinking about what critical race theory is. And one of the things is to start with what it's not. Critical race theory really began in the legal profession, a way of applying a critical view to how race and racism in particular have affected the legal system and people's experiences of the legal system. It's been that language has been appropriated now to talk more broadly about the ways in which we can use a critical lens to think about how race and racism are affecting different ways in which we do things. The controversy is coming where there is some anxiety. Well, that's the more, I think, gracious way of putting that, about what impact this can have if we're really calling out the role racism has played in the way we teach, in the way that we do law, in the way that we do healthcare, and that people will be made to feel guilty, and that a lot of the heroes will be lost. And I think the thing that people are saying is we have to get to the truth. To be truly inclusive, to be truly equitable, you have to undo the past injustices. You have to be honest about them. And you have to be deliberate about doing better. And you can't do that unless you talk about how we got here. These things didn't just come from nowhere. They are the consequence of decisions and policies and actions. And if we can't speak truth to that, we can't really do anything equitable and inclusive. There's only so much training you can do. After a while, you have to actually dismantle certain systems and rebuild new ones. And that's where critical race theory comes in.
How do you think this idea evolved that critical race theory somehow entails teaching people to hate America and individuals to be ashamed of their heritage?
I think it evolves from when you talk about issues of privilege and of power, and you are critiquing them. then it does mean, if you follow that criticism to its logical extension in terms of equity and inclusion and belonging and diversity, it does mean that power balances are going to shift. There's certain people who are used to having certain privileges and certain power are no longer going to have access to that. And I think that's where the pushback is coming. Certain people have gotten used to feeling comfortable, being unchallenged, taking for granted certain pathways to success, certain ways of getting to be heard and their voices mattering, where now there will be more competition for who gets to speak and who gets heard. There'll be more competition about access to resources. Things will be more fair. And that is threatening because it does mean that some people who have taken certain privileges and power and status for granted can no longer do that. And I believe that's where the pushback is coming from.
Thank you so much. And at the University of Michigan, you're working on this extraordinary initiative supported by the Mellon Foundation, known as College and Beyond, and outcomes of a liberal arts education. The purpose is to develop and refine a set of measures of the liberal education experience that can be employed across institutions. And we'd love to learn more about this, why it's important that we reevaluate how we assess the liberal arts education, what role inclusive excellence plays in the initiative, and what is the ongoing research brought to light thus far that's been absent in past studies and existing literature.
So I also, thank you for including me in this panel. And I will say, I will take a shot at those questions, and we've held full panels on just that. And so I won't be able to do it justice, but this project is really exciting in terms of trying to think about how you think about the outcomes of a liberal arts or liberal arts and sciences education in more expansive ways as part of advocating for a liberal arts and sciences education. And I think often we get outcomes that look, for example, at salary, right? Job placement and salary, which is a really inadequate way to think about, if you think about the goals of a liberal arts education, and what we might be educating people to do or want them to think that they want to do, want to learn and want to be able to do, it's really inadequate. So this survey is collecting information about, and I'll just give you some of the broad categories. So first, health and well-being. So asking about a life well lived. And I think that's actually really important. And then it does ask questions about employment and income, but it also asks much more granular questions about how are people thriving in their work? What challenges are they encountering? What skills do they have? And this is where I think, inclusive excellence plays in all over this survey. But if you think about, one of the ways that I often talk about a liberal arts education is that one of the skills that you're honing is being able to understand the world from perspectives that are different from your own, which is actually one of the hardest skills in the world to hone. And Andrea, I was thinking about it as you were talking, right? Part of this is you have to understand that you've experienced one version of history, you've learned one version of history. And as we build other histories, and it forces you to challenge what you think you knew about the world, or the systems that seemed common sense and natural to you, which don't seem common sense and natural to other people. And that challenges power. And so that's a piece of this. The arts and cultural engagement, right? We don't ask about this usually as an outcome. Civic engagement and political participation. And I think for me, this also really opens up spaces where I continue to think about inclusive excellence of some of them are much less individual, of how are you giving back to your community? How are you participating in your community? And we know that some of the individualistic measures participate in systems that are not diverse and not inclusive, because not everyone that's not how everyone wants to participate, or what they would see as success, or how they are driven in terms of what gives them purpose. And so what I love about this is trying to think in much more holistic ways about where graduates are going, what are the lifelong outcomes, with life understood expansively and not just what is your job and how much money do you make?
Mm, mm. That engaged pluralism seems more important than ever as we face increasing polarization and partisanship, and there isn't any agreement on the truth and facts. So thank you so much for sharing that. Francis, as a visiting scholar for Phi Beta Kappa, you recently visited a variety of campuses to discuss the beauty of mathematics as a liberal arts. What did you learn in that experience about inclusive excellence?
Well, one thing that's of course really great when you visit a lot of different institutions is you see how each campus is attempting to live out their various missions. And I think one of the things that's may be hard for people to wrap their minds around is that there are many different, each college has a different mission, and so there's actually many different goals that different institutions have. And I think this is a model also for the way we think about how we measure what excellence is. It doesn't always have to be one particular notion of what excellence is. I mean, Harvard has a particular mission it's trying to live out. The school I'm at, Harvey College, has a different mission. And so I think inclusive excellence needs to take into account the many different roles and missions that goals that people have. And then, of course, speaking maybe more personally in terms of my own field in mathematics, one of the things that you see when you try to engage broader audiences around mathematics in particular is that many people have had very exclusive experiences in mathematics, either from the inside or from the outside. And I think part of the reason that happens is often people think of math as just a set of skills, like factoring a quadratic or learning how to add some numbers together. But they don't see that math is also a set of practices. And those particular practices, the way we practice mathematics, can often have an exclusive effect, even if we weren't intending it in some ways, unless we're very careful to design practices that are inclusive. And so that's something that comes out when you give lots of talks around the country, is you see different people have had some hard experiences in mathematics. And so they're often surprised to see math showcased as a liberal art.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Now, Anne, as you were talking about what's going on in certain areas where excellence is often tied to employability, in states like Florida, where they've tried to limit scholarship funding for students who are not majoring in disciplines that are deemed immediately employable, whatever that is these days. But recognizing that we are constrained and sometimes aided by the politics in our states, and University of Michigan, Harvey Mudd College, Centre College are all situated in different regions of the country. How does geography, this is a question for each of you, especially as it relates to state politics and local culture, play a role in shaping an understanding of inclusive excellence and promoting it? So Andrea, we'll begin with you.
So I'm in Kentucky, where we have a Democratic leader, a Democratic governor, and from which Mitch McConnell also hails. And so this is a place where we have, you've got some clashes going on in politics. And you see that playing out in the academy in terms of, I think, this struggle over whose voices get heard, and the argument that more conservative voices are being silenced. And we have to deal with this issue of making sure that all voices have space to be heard, but at the same time, taking into account that some voices have been heard more often than others, that some voices have built-in microphones, that some voices are used to being applauded, and that to be truly inclusive means that some voices that are used to being amplified are not going to be so much. Let's not be being so metaphorical about this. That the people who are used to being privileged and having and speaking in a classroom either as a faculty member or as a student, that there is this clash now, I think, about the fact that as more voices are being brought into the conversation, that competition for who gets heard, and some resentment for some voices are used to being heard, that those things are being amplified. And I think what we are wrestling with right now is to be fair in the sense that all voices should be heard, but to have equity. And equity doesn't mean you treat everyone the same. Equity means you take into consideration the fact, the things I was saying before, that certain people come with histories of and contemporary spaces of privilege. And for some people, it is more difficult to not only speak up, but then for people to be heard, that people aren't going to listen to you as much when you speak, that what you say isn't going to be valued as much, that you're not going to have an entire row of books that are validating everything you're saying and your experiences, and that makes a difference in the conversation. So I think in terms of what academia has to deal with is, how do we reconcile that? How do we reconcile being fair with also being equitable, and sometimes living with that discomfort that not everybody's going to be happy, that there is going to be some resentment, that not every voice gets heard as much as they want to, and that's what inclusion and equity and justice looks like when you're actually in it.
Well, there's certainly a national rhetoric that suggests that colleges and universities are bastions of liberal progressivism, training the next generation of snowflakes, and that fuels the culture wars. And I think there was no place where these culture wars were in starker relief than in Michigan over the past few months. So, Anne, how has it been there, and what insights do you have on these issues?
Well, it's such an interesting question, and one that, you can spin in so many directions. And so I'll spin it in a couple, and then we can go from there. So, right. So we're in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a very blue part of a purple state. And this state right now is very purple. So it is, and we have a Democrat as a governor, and we have a Republican controlled state legislature. So we are really, so in Michigan, we've just, one of the things we're trying to do is embrace that these are hard conversations. Our state embodies the conversations that are happening in the country. And so last year we held a theme year, which was democracy and debate. And in many ways, we were trying to do the work, Andrea, that you are talking about, which is, how do we have hard conversations? How do we listen? How do we do it equitably, which is, as you say, not the same as equally? What are we trying to get out of this as an institution? But to say, this is what universities do, because Lynn, I think we do have to worry about the reputation that universities have, that we are these liberal bastions where conservative voices cannot be heard, where we're not willing to have hard conversations because we're, quote unquote, brainwashing people to all think one way, which is not my experience of universities. That universities are places where we challenge each other. And if you can't do it at a university, then we really have a problem. And so we're really trying to embrace that. So that's a part of the answer. And then, of course, for Michigan as a public institution, as we think about inclusive excellence, it's our commitment to the state as well as to the nation and the world. And so really thinking about who we're trying to educate in the state and the diversity of students who we need to reach. And we're not as successful as we need to be right now in terms of the diversity of students who we're reaching in the state, and then the out-of-state students and international students. So that balance at a public institution like Michigan is also part of the picture for us.
Thank you. Frances, you're out on the left coast, and so how are these issues being framed where you are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I now live in California, in Los Angeles, which is definitely very diverse um, part of the state. But I've also grew up in a small rural town in Texas, and was part of a very different culture there. And so I think one of the things that I've realized, even as I've made the transition from Texas to the East Coast and then to California, is just how much of the local culture does really influence what I understand and what I think. And I'll just give you an example. Like, I'm Asian American. I grew up in a small town in South Texas, and experienced a fair bit of the question, like, oh, no, where are you really from? That kind of question. Like I couldn't be from actually a small town in South Texas. I must be from somewhere else. And of course, in California, in Los Angeles, I rarely get that question, because there's so many Asian Americans here. Asian Americans built the railroads here, and we've been in the state for a long time. And so it's funny that it's only in moving to California that, when I reflect back on my experience in a rural part of Texas, that I realized, gosh, like there's a certain energy that I don't have to spend in California justifying that I'm American, right? So there's and that's something I didn't quite realize until I actually lived in the context where I didn't feel unusual in some ways. And so I only say that not to denigrate Texas, because there's lots of great things about Texas, and I understand and appreciate many of the things that conservatives are trying to do, because I sort of grew up in that culture. I say that only to point out that when you are in a state, in a part of the state that maybe normalizes diversity, you begin to see its value in a different way. It's not just on a theoretical level. And I should say that at the same time, just because I'm in a very diverse environment doesn't mean that conversations about a lot of these topics can't still be hard, even among people who generally agree on issues of diversity and equity and inclusion. And so I say that only to just challenge all of us to be very mindful of how we treat each other with respect in these conversations. It can be very difficult.
Thank you. COVID-19 had a profound impact on higher education. And in that pivot to remote and online learning, which was quite remarkable, we also saw unveiled the expansiveness of the digital divide, the food and shelter insecurities experienced by students at all types of institutions across the country. There's talk now of fears of a lost generation of college students, with students, young Black men and young Latinx men at greatest risk of not entering college or dropping out of college. And so in the aftermath of COVID-19, the ensuing financial crisis, this moment of racial reckoning, what are the main challenges facing colleges and universities in the pursuit of inclusive excellence? Andrea, we'll start with you.
I mean, that's a big one. I think that it's basically what you just brought up. It's making sure that those voices and those populations aren't lost. And that means that the work has to begin before they get to college, and that colleges and universities need to play a role in reaching out to those high schools and those middle schools, where students who are especially vulnerable to not being included in this process, that they know what college is, that they are given real ways of getting to college, financially and culturally and socially, that there's a pathway there, and that they're coming to a place where they'll be able to thrive. But that means finding them now. And it means investing in programming and in scholarships that really help to give them the skills to be ready for college, and to be interested in college. to make it a place that makes sense about why I'm going to go there for 4 years and maybe go into some debt, and maybe leave a place. Why does this matter? And so I think that colleges and universities that start investing in that, particularly with young men of different racial backgrounds, and all people of different genders, of different who are first generation students. I think they will be particularly vulnerable as well. That we have to do that work now, and we know how to do it. We run these kind of programs all the time about getting students ready to come to college, but we're usually focusing on different demographic. And now we need to shift it. It's not just making sure that we bring our star high school students in. It means bringing in those stars that we aren't paying as much attention to yet, that are shining in different kinds of ways, and making sure that we invite them in, even if they don't come to our school, that they are at least, that this is a real option for them.
It does seem necessary that if we're going to focus on inclusive excellence, that we have to ensure that colleges and universities are a place of welcome and belonging for all students, no matter what institution. Thank you. Thank you. Anne.
Yeah, well, I would start, I think, Andrea, you put it beautifully, and that's where I would start as well, is that we have to see this as part of our mission to the common good, which is we need to reach out to students before college. And I agree, it's middle school and high school. You gotta reach pretty far back. We're developing right now a program called Intend to Attend to really think about how can we, again, as a public institution, help here. And part of that coming out of COVID is to think about what is in person. And as we think about what's scalable, how can we use online resources? How can we develop those kinds of tools and courses or support systems that we can do remotely as well to try to reach more students, to help them even think that college is a possibility, whatever college. And so I would also add that I think relationships with community colleges are essential here, that community colleges are, they're an incredibly diverse student body, and they need to be partnerships. I actually I have some concerns about the term pipeline because it is so unidirectional as a term. That we need to partner with community colleges. Four-year institutions have a lot to learn from community colleges, where often students feel a much stronger sense of belonging and like their voices matter than they can sometimes feel at four-year institutions. So that would be a piece of it. And then the last piece the challenges are so great. Andrea, you mentioned first generation students, and I think I'm really glad you did. I think this is a growing population of college students, as it needs to be, as it should be. And one of the things we know is that it's not enough just to make sure that all students, and here I'll think about first generation students, can afford to come to college, can get into college and afford to come. We need to provide what I would call wraparound support when they're on campus. And we've really learned this, that just getting students to campus is not sufficient. And there's been some brilliant research done on this recently, about all the supports we need to create community, to create a sense of belonging and mattering on campus, and to talk about the hidden curriculum. And this is where we have to think about systems, because students are entering a system that may be unfamiliar to them, and that can really thwart them in their effort to thrive. And they can be in this environment where it feels like everybody else seems to know how to navigate this, and nobody's talking about it. And so I think we really have to think about wraparound support so that students don't just arrive, but thrive on campus. So that's another piece of the puzzle.
Frank, Francis, what would you add?
Yeah, to add to the good things that Andrea and Anna both said, I just want to say a couple of things related to math and science. I think I'll reemphasize the point that I think one challenge to inclusive excellence pursuing it is the idea that people have that math and science are just a set of facts, and not and forgetting that math and science also include a set of practices. And so we have, the more that students as well as professors can begin to see that and realize that, I think the more open they'll be to thinking about what inclusive teaching looks like and what the practices are that we engage in that tend to either include or exclude people from these fields. The second thing I think is also important to point out is that math and science aren't just useful for getting jobs. That's certainly true, they are. And of course, you know, our economy is now an information economy, and this is important, yes. But I think we need to begin to reframe math and science as intrinsic goods that people can do and enjoy because they're worthwhile to do and interesting to expand our minds and experience wonder and joy and beauty. The reason I say that is when you frame math and science as something you need to do to get a good job, people just think in terms of, well, I've just got to get a leg up on my competition, and it's about competing for jobs, rather than thinking about these things as public goods that everybody can enjoy and appreciate, and it would benefit society in huge ways and individuals in huge ways for us to fulfill our potential and to experience the wonder and joy that these disciplines can provide.
Lynn, can I just jump in there for 1 second? Because I love what Francis, what you just said, and it made me think about, because particularly in STEM, we have these courses that are often called the weed out courses, right? Which is such an awful term, as if that is the goal, is like, let's see how many students we can get out of here who won't make it. And to think about what can happen when those become welcome in classes, whether that's because it's going to be your major or because science and math are fascinating and you just get to enjoy the wonder of that, even if it's only an introductory course. And that shift in thinking that this is not about finding the excellent ones, because we also know those weed out courses disproportionately weed out women and underrepresented minority students. Like, we have the data to know that that's what they do.
And when we see that it's the practices that are doing that weeding rather than the skills, then I think we'll begin to make some headway there.
Yeah.
Now, each of you has made a compelling case for colleges and universities serving as anchor institutions where we demonstrate that our success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, economic, educational, health, well-being of those in the communities in which we're located, those we seek to serve. And yet tenure and promotion processes often mitigate against faculty and staff doing this kind of work. But each of you has made a commitment to partaking in public writing, civic engagement. How has interacting with broader audiences informed your views and your teaching of the liberal arts and sciences? Andrea?
Sorry. I think it really sometimes as academics we can get lost in the arguments, in the nuances, and parsing through the different ways of doing things. But by engaging with the public, you have to get to the nitty-gritty. Why does this matter? How does this matter? How do we apply it? Where are the places where it gets messy and confusing? And how do we work through that as people coming from different perspectives with different agendas who will be differently impacted by the decisions that we make? And so I think it's a way of keeping things grounded, keeping things in some ways much more honest about, because sometimes you can hide in the theory and the fancy language. But when you really have to spell out what this means and answer those hard questions of what does this mean for me? What is this going to give me? What is this going to cost me? Then that's when I think that we as a society, where academia really matters, and where we are making our contribution to that greater good of bringing in this thoughtful process of how we can all do this better.
Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, your question of sort of, is this valued in the academy? I think it needs to be, and it needs to be valued more and more. That, and I have been really appreciative. We have a president at the University of Michigan right now who has encouraged faculty to do public engagement work, to do that kind of public intellectual engagement. We still have work to do to make sure it's valued in things like the tenure and promotion process, because you can't say, go do this, and then not value it when it comes to people's tenure and promotion cases. But it is one of the places where we can have a lot of impact. There are other places where we have impact within our fields, but that kind of public work is really important, both for, I think, each of us as scholars, and Andrea, I think you were saying this just now, of the academy, the relevance of the academy and what we have to offer in terms of our expertise and our knowledge. So the other thing I would add, that for me personally, so I'm trained as a linguist and have loved doing public intellectual work, is, and this is, I think, just a different, in some ways, a spin on what Andrea was saying, which is it asks us to take really seriously the belief systems that are circulating all around us, and to engage with those beliefs. You can call them ideologies, you can call them, but that, and not to dismiss them and to say, oh, well, you're being silly to think that, and let me tell you how it really is. But to say, okay, why do you think that? And I will say, people believe all kinds of things about language and linguistic diversity that I would say are not well-founded. My job is to figure out, why do they believe those things, and how can I open the door to asking them to rethink those belief systems, knowing that rethinking belief systems is really hard. That's what we do as educators, is try to challenge belief systems. It doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen in a week. It's the long-term work. And that, I think we need to think about public engagement that way too. This is long-term work, which to me is a good way to spend a career, is doing that as part of a career.
Thank you. Francis.
I don't have too much more to add, other than just to say that I think public engagement is something that more of us need to do as academics. I really like the NSF changing its criteria many years ago to include broader impacts as one of the criteria for which research grants are awarded. And I really like that framing in terms of thinking about, how many people are going to read one of my research papers versus how many people are going to read an op-ed that I wrote or a book that I wrote, things like that. And so the more of us that can do that, I think the better.
Excellent. So this is the last question for you. It's a tough one. For some critics of the concept of inclusive excellence, efforts to promote diversity and inclusion are seen as inconsistent with excellence. How do we make the case that academic excellence cannot exist without diversity and equity? And what role can Phi Beta Kappa play in helping institutions meet this equity mandate? So Andrea, we'll start with you.
I think that often the concern that it won't be excellence, it is basically just a voicing of racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, ableism. This idea that those people who are not considered, who are not centered, who have been underrepresented and marginalized, are in those spaces because they don't deserve to be centered, because they are inherently inferior. Even though we've got really fancy ways of saying it now, that's what we're saying. So I think anytime I hear that, that's what I hear. And so I'll just leave that where that is. I think the other thing but in terms of why diversity matters, yes, it matters to have lots of different people here. It's only fair and just that our spaces should reflect the larger demographics that we see, that people shouldn't go into spaces where they're the only ones all of the time, where there are other people who can model for them and mentor to them what success looks like when you're embodying certain positionalities. That is very, very important. But what's also even more or just as important is that when you have diverse ideas and when you truly include them, then you are bringing in different perspectives and ideas, and that cross-pollination of ways of seeing things, of life experiences, of approaching math, of approaching linguistics, of approaching culture. That really pushes everyone forward in terms of what we can accomplish. And that's the important part, that we are better for that cross-pollination. And to be truly inclusive, I think we have to keep in mind that it means you don't just bring in people who are different so that they learn to act the same as everybody else. You bring in people who are different, who then are allowed to make a difference to how we've done things. And we call that innovation. And everywhere else, we love innovation. We love coming up with a brand new way of doing things and, bringing two things we're familiar with and coming up with something new or something totally out of the blue. That's how that happens when you have that kind of diversity and you're truly inclusive about it. And that innovation is what leads to excellence. So you can't have one without the other, would be my response.
Thank you so much. Anne?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll try to add a little something, but that was a beautiful response. So one way that, another way to talk about it is that when you look at a space or an institution that's not representative, that's not diverse, that's the problem. And DEI is actually the solution to the problem. It's not like that's the problem. And it's a problem for many reasons, one of which is it means that we have suppressed talent. Because the fact that you do not have diversity in that room means that there are talented people who didn't have a chance to be there. And that's the problem that we have to fix. And DEI is the solution to that problem. So that I think can sort of shift the way people are thinking about something. And this builds on what Andrea was just saying, that the people in that room have trouble seeing the system in which they are participating, because it is a system that has worked for them, and getting other people who've had different experiences and different perspectives is one of the ways you're going to be able to challenge that system to make it more inclusive, to allow more talent to flourish as you allow more people to flourish. And when I think about, our mission, is to solve challenging, complicated problems. And to do that, we have to be able to challenge common sense ideas. We have to manage discomfort. We have to challenge our own points of view. That's how you get to innovation. And you need to have a diversity of perspectives in the room and create environments where all those voices can speak and be heard and matter. And that's where you have to change the dynamics of the system that we're participating in. So we also know that people are more creative when they get sparked, when they get challenged, when something that you took for granted is challenged by somebody for whom that is not their experience. That's not the unmarked experience. So that's just a couple more thoughts on a really complicated question, and I'll turn it over to Frances.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly the skills and competencies you mentioned are at the heart of a liberal arts and sciences education. So Frances, you've got the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, all the good stuff has been said already, which is great for me. But I'll just add maybe briefly, just to encourage people to think about what excellence is for, and who it's for, and why do we do math, and why do we hope to advance the field? I mean, is excellence really just about personal credentials? And I would say it's not. If we're trying to advance the field, whatever it may be, we want all the best ideas, the ones that will challenge the status quo included.
Thank you so much to each of you for your wonderful insights, for all that you do to further Phi Beta Kappa's mission. For our audience, we invite you to continue the conversation throughout the week in sessions, including the sessions room on Friday. So again, thanks for all that you do, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the rest of the meeting. Take care.